The Seattle Seahawks began their career as an expansion team for the NFL's AFC West in the 1976 season, alongside with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the NFC West for some reason, in their original creamsicle color scheme, and both of these teams were absolutely horrible. Seattle not nearly as much as Tampa Bay, but the Seahawks did go 2-12 their first season. The Buccaneers, it's almost like they had to wait a season to actually be a real NFL team. The expansion Buccaneers are very often seen as the worst team in professional football history, when they, in their first season, went 0-14 and then accomplished what Seattle did prior to them next season with a 2-12 record. Even worse than that season, they had no wins through their first 12 games, and the Buccaneers hold the current record for the longest game losing streak ever, with a seemingly unbeatable 26 losses in a row. Let's get back to the Seahawks for a bit and talk about some of their own strife and failure as a sad sap of an expansion team. One of their biggest rivals at the time were the Kansas City Chiefs, who for a while were even worse than Seattle. However, from 1981 to 1989, every single time the Seahawks played at Arrowhead Stadium, they lost. 7 straight losses for the Seahawks to a team that was even worse than them. In 1990 against the Chiefs at Arrowhead, however, things got really weird. Derek Thomas, a player for the Chiefs, got 7 sacks on Seattle quarterback Dave Craig, a record that has still not been broken by any individual player in the NFL. While Thomas got his record, though, Seattle somehow came back with a Hail Mary throw to win the game, breaking the losing streak. And then they went back to conformity, with the Seahawks losing at Arrowhead another 9 times. If the Seahawks did not get extremely lucky, it would have been a 17-game losing streak from 1981 to 1998. The Seahawks, since their inception, shared a stadium with the Seattle Mariners of the MLB, the Kingdome, a multi-use stadium meant to harbor all kinds of events and... oh crap, the sky fell in. That's no good. It's okay though. Our college bros knows a guy who will let us crash at their place in the University of Washington. Yes, the Seattle Seahawks played in Husky Stadium in the 95 season, and it was mediocre. UW didn't really like having them there, but begrudgingly accepted them on some side rules. No painting over anything, and no removing or replacing anything that is meant to be permanent. The NFL had to listen, but also had their own rules for the game, because in the NFL, the goalposts are 10 feet taller and painted yellow rather than white. The Seahawks, not being allowed to temporarily remove or repaint the goalposts, found a solution: draping and covering the goal with yellow cloth and extending it taller with pool noodles. It somehow was allowed, and a fight between UW, the NFL, and the Seattle Seahawks never happened. The Seahawks are back in the Kingdome in 1996. Okay, let's blow it up. Well, that kinda came out of nowhere, but there was a reason. In 2000, Seattle built a new stadium for the Seattle Seahawks and named it Seahawks Stadium, and then Quest Field, and then CenturyLink Field, and then Lumen Field. The 12th man was already known to be very loud, but it wasn't exactly a defining feature of the team. But when Seahawks Stadium was being built, they added roofs for the fans to protect from the occasional rain in Seattle. It did that, as well as reflecting crowd noise onto the field. And just like a domino effect, the fans loved being loud, so they got even louder, reflecting more sound onto the field and making the fans even louder and louder. A tradition was born from this. Almost everyone knows about the Beastquake, but an example of the 12th man being as loud as possible I find more interesting was a game facing the New York Giants in Week 12 of the 2005 season. Although the Seahawks only barely won in overtime, the Giants could barely communicate with all the noise. Given that they couldn't communicate clearly, they were given a record 11 delay of game penalties. The 12th man was deafening. Mike Holmgren, the head coach at the time, honored the fans by putting the game-winning ball on display. It is still at Lumen Field, formerly CenturyLink Field, formerly Quest Field, formerly Seahawks Stadium, to this day. Seahawks have had some really weird punting stats over the years, especially when you learn about the people who did them. In the 1989 season, Week 7 against the Denver Broncos, punter Ruben Rodriguez gained a new nickname from the 12th man, Mr. Negative. Rodriguez punted on the 50-yard line and managed to kick a negative 3-yard punt, putting the Broncos in Seattle territory. This brought his average punt length that game down to a horrible 31.71 yards, which isn't even close to his worst game average ever, with a whopping 26-yard average in Week 11 of the 1987 season with the Seahawks. That was sad. Let's keep it sad. Rick Tootin became the Seahawks' new staple punter in 1991, and it was obvious that he was a great one, leading the league in punts in 1992, overall punting yards in 92 and 93, and had the longest punt in the entire league in 95. He was also really buff, like really buff. So buff, in fact, that there were times sports broadcasters would interrupt the game just to show how beefy this man was. Unfortunately, on November 9th, 1997, on his first punt this game, he injured his groin extremely badly, even having to limp off the field. Regardless, he kept punting that game, kicking 5 more after that. He took a break next week, and then came back November 23rd against the Kansas City Chiefs to see how he was feeling. He went up to punt, kicked it straight in the air, and ended up going negative 6 yards, breaking the record Rodriguez had set 8 years prior, and simultaneously crushed his nuts. He was out for the season, and was never really the same again. Our next Seattle punter on the chopping block is John Ryan. No, not that John Ryan, or that John Ryan, this John Ryan. He joined the Seahawks in 2008 after playing for the Green Bay Packers for 2 seasons, and let's just say that he was immediately better on the Seahawks than he was on Green Bay. And we're not going to get onto how bad he was in Green Bay, but we're going to get into how good he was in Seattle, because he kicked rockets and also threw them for some reason. He showed off his magic in the 2014 season NFC Championship game against his old employers, the Packers, throwing a fake field goal pass to score Seattle's first points of the game and eventually winning it. Thanks, John! Seattle's current punter, Michael Dixon, is most well known for screwing up big time and somehow picking up the pieces and rearranging them into something even better. How so? Double punt. Dixon's punt was blocked, so he rushed to scoop up the ball and punted again. What a madman.